Welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
There's lots of hatred online right now. A new thing called headlightsism. I'm not even joking. People are saying you should get the death penalty for driving with those bright white LEDs on your headlights. It's getting crazy out there, which brings me to this episode's theme of night drive horror stories. And lucky for all of us, you can enjoy these stories whether you have the plain old bulbs of the past or those crazy LEDs. In these stories, you'll find ghost dogs, a very bizarre and ominous encounter on a dark wooded trail, and other dark road drive shenanigans. Enjoy. These are tales from the break room. And hey, if you've got a scary work story of your own, send it to me at eriecast.com/submit. Unlock bonus content at eriecast.com/plus by becoming a member, and help us grow to be the biggest scary story show on the internet by reviewing and following Tales from the Break Room on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thank you. Canine Haunting from Anon. I've not been in the best financial situation for several months. For a while now, I have taken up DoorDash to get some extra cash. Thanks to my DoorDashing, I've encountered some stuff that's hard to explain. I'll go over my scariest experience here. I usually go DoorDashing mostly on evenings after my regular job. This happened one Tuesday night. It was around 9:30 p.m. I got a ping for a pickup from this Mexican place I delivered from pretty often. The order was decent sized, about $75 worth of food, and the customer put in a $25 tip up front, which is pretty rare. The delivery address would take me about 15 minutes outside of town, so kind of distant, but worth the cash. I'd done plenty of rural deliveries before. People who live out in the sticks tend to tip better because they know it's a hassle. The restaurant was quick with the order, and my app showed an estimated delivery time of 10:15 p.m. Pretty straightforward stuff. The first part of my drive was normal, regular county roads. But once I turned onto their road, it got dark real fast. It's one of those narrow roads with woods on both sides and no streetlights. Google Maps said I had about 4 miles to go when something happened. This big white blur of a dog just appeared in my headlights. I mean, right there. It was this really distinct looking breed, one of those fancy Russian hunting dogs with a long snout. A Borzoi, I looked up later. I slammed on my brakes but felt the impact. It wasn't hard, but I knew I definitely hit it. I pulled over right away, getting out to check. I was freaking out. I love dogs, and the thought of hitting one made me sick to my stomach. When I looked around, however, there was nothing there. No dead dog on the road, no blood, not even any fur on the bumper. I checked the ditch on both sides of the road with my flashlight, but there was nothing. Had I just barely clipped it and didn't really hurt it? I'm telling you, I felt an impact, not just a clip. I got back in my car, still shaken up, and checked the time. 9:55. I was still on time to make the delivery, so I kept going. The actual delivery was completely normal. It was this nice house at the end of a long driveway, porch lights on. The customer met me at the door, thanked me for coming out so far. I got back in my car at about 10:20 p.m. and started to head back the same way I came. I was very careful driving back down that road. When I got to about where I thought I'd hit that dog before, I slowed down. But I saw it again. I swear it was the exact same dog, same breed, same size, right in the middle of the road. I stopped completely this time, still about 30 feet away from it. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. This was the same spot, and I was certain that was the same dog. But it was just standing there, staring at my car. I turned on my high beams, and it still didn't budge. I don't know why, but I decided to get out of the car. Maybe I felt guilty. Maybe I thought I had hit it and it was injured or out of its mind. The dog was still there when I got out, but as I took a step forward, it ran off into the woods, like I had spooked it. I sighed, kinda hoping it would come back. It's a cool-looking dog breed, if not a little weird, and still I wanted to be sure if it was hurt or not. I then spun around with my phone in my hand. I froze, felt like my heart was gonna explode, because standing in a perfect line between me and my car were 6 more white Borzoi dogs, all identical, all completely silent, and each one of them was staring right at me. I can't tell you exactly how scared I was, but imagine that, in the middle of a dark forest, separated from your car, and these 6 rather big dogs, more like phantoms, were staring you down. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. They were spaced so evenly it looked artificial, like someone had used a ruler to position them. None of them made any noise. I couldn't even hear them breathe. There was just 6 pairs of eyes. I stood there for a while, terrified to make any sudden move. Then the worst thing happened. They all lunged in my direction, snarls on their faces, completely suddenly. I remember screaming out to no one or anyone that would listen. I closed my eyes and covered my face, expecting to be ripped apart. But nothing happened. After a quiet moment, I opened my eyes and removed my arms from my face. The road was empty, save for my car. Those dogs were gone. You better believe I scrambled right up and ran to my car just in case they came back. But the doors were locked. My car automatically locks the doors if I step out with the fob in my pocket, so I had to dig my keys out of my pocket with hands that were kind of shaky. That's when I heard it. The sound of dog paws running full speed on the pavement, coming right at me from behind. It was so clear, so real. Then I caught this overwhelming smell of wet and dirty dog. Reminded me of when my neighbor's hunting dogs get caught up in the rain. I clicked the button on the fob, yanked the door open, and practically dove inside. I slammed the door shut and locked it. But when I looked out the window, of course, there was nothing there. I pulled away from there as quickly as I could. My heart was beating so hard, it felt like I ran a mile. I kept checking every mirror in the vehicle, all the way back to town, but I never did see anything follow me. When I got home, I checked my car thoroughly. There was no damage or dents or anything. I checked my phone. It was 10:45 p.m. The entire series of events had only taken a few minutes. If you include the delivery, maybe an hour. I kept telling myself the remainder of the night I was tired. My mind was playing very vivid tricks. But I doubted it. I knew what I saw. Those dogs weren't right. They moved in sync, the perfect spacing between them, and how they appeared and disappeared together. And that smell right at the end, I'll never forget. Call me insane, but those were phantom dogs. That road is haunted by the spirits of dogs. Update. 2 weeks after I sent this story, something else happened that I need to add. I got another order from the same customer out there. The tip was actually even better this time, $30. Before accepting the order though, I hovered over the accept button. After experiencing something like that on that road, you get kind of hesitant to go back. But call me stupid, I took it anyway. That was a nice big tip, but mostly I wanted to know if I'd imagined the whole thing before. And to be safe, I promised myself I wouldn't get out of the car if anything weird did happen. The drive out there was completely fine though. No more ghost dogs. I kept my eyes glued to the road the whole time. Didn't even want to blink, especially at the spot where it all happened before. But when I passed through, it was just empty pavement. I got to the customer's house. It was the same guy as last time. Real friendly guy, probably in his 50s. As I handed him his food, maybe it's out of line, but I blurted out about what happened last time on the road, starting with something like, "Is this road haunted?" He didn't laugh or look at me like I was crazy. He just kind of nodded and said, "You saw the Schaefer dogs." Then he told me this story about an old lady named Margaret Schaefer, who used to live out there in the 70s. Apparently, there used to be another road that connected to that one, but it was all overgrown now. She had this big old house back there and bred Borzoi dogs. She was known for being really particular about them. She preferred the white ones, always kept exactly 6 at a time. According to him, one winter, nobody had seen her for a while. When the police finally checked on her, they found her dead inside her house. The door was locked from the inside, and the 6 dogs were all there too, also dead. The extraordinary part, maybe the creepy part, was that even though she'd been dead for weeks with the dogs still alive, they had not touched a hair on her body. They just sat there with her, and eventually died of dehydration. He said he wasn't sure how much of that story was true. Said you had to think at least one of the dogs would have taken a bite of her or something. But they didn't, according to the story. They just stayed with her until the end, her end and theirs. I asked if he'd ever seen anything weird on the road himself. He got this funny look on his face and said, "There's a reason I order delivery if I need food after dark." I did do 2 more deliveries out there after that. Nothing happened either time. But to this day, I still get a weird feeling when I have to pass through that road. Every time I smell someone's wet dog, I flash back to that memory, seeing those 6 Borzois between me and my car. The Man on Trail 23. From Anonymous. It was 2019 and I'd just gotten out of a nasty divorce. I was broke and bitter, so when Montana Fish and Wildlife offered me a position with better pay than my Idaho gig, I jumped at it. The divorce wasn't entirely my fault. My wife had apparently been screwing her physical therapy help for months. But I'll admit I was a mess those last few years. I drank a bit too much, let my temper get the best of me. My dad always said I should have gone into construction like him and my brothers. But I couldn't stand the idea of building houses. Being a game warden felt right, like I was protecting something that mattered. Even if the pay was crap compared to other gigs, most days were just writing tickets to idiot hunters who couldn't count their tags right. The Montana job came with a little cabin near the management area. It wasn't much. The hot water was spotty and the roof leaked when it rained. But after a few months of sleeping on my brother's couch in Boise, it felt like a palace. The isolation helped too. Gave me space to get my head straight and cut back on the drinking. By fall, I was finally starting to feel myself again. The divorce papers were signed. My wife had the house, of course, and I was down to a 6-pack a week instead of a day. Then that night happened, and everything felt sideways again. I recall it was a Wednesday. I'd been dealing with this rancher all day who swore up and down that wolves were killing his cattle. Turned out to be feral dogs, but try telling that to someone who's already made up their mind. By the time I finished the paperwork for that ordeal, it was past sunset, and I just wanted to get back to my cabin. 2 weeks before that, we'd found some weird stuff in the area, like mutilated deer carcasses that didn't look like typical predator kills. The cuts were very clean, with parts missing that animals don't typically take. I'd been checking sites all week, trying to piece together a pattern. One morning, I'd found 3 more deer in the same condition, but something was different about these. They were arranged in a way that felt deliberate, like someone was making a display and wanted them to be seen. I took some samples and photos, which I can't give to you unfortunately, planning to send them to the state lab in the morning. Trail 23 would be the quickest way back. Just a dirt road really, but it would save 20 or so minutes compared to going on the highway. My truck knew every pothole by heart at that point. I was thinking about the leftover pizza in my fridge when I spotted the white pickup ahead, pulled over to the side a bit, like someone had just stopped to take a leak. Earlier that week, I'd gotten reports from some hikers about a white truck parked in odd places. They said the driver would just sit there, watching the trails through his binoculars. By the time I would check, though, he was always gone. Now, as I drove up, I would normally just drive past someone like this. It was the end of my shift, and I was hungry. I had pizza waiting, but something about the truck set off alarm bells in my head. Maybe it looked too clean compared to every other vehicle I'd seen that day. Maybe it was parked just a little too perfectly. It's hard to explain. I pulled up behind it, grabbing the spotlight from my center console. The plates were Montana, but not local. From over near the Dakota border, it looked like. Running them through dispatch would take forever out here, and my radio was spotty in this stretch anyway. The truck's interior looked strange through the back window. Too empty. I went around to the driver's side, and I realized the truck didn't have any seats in it. Just bare metal floor with some scattered tools. And there were dark stains in there that made my stomach turn just looking at them. There was something else too. A camera mounted on the dashboard, pointing outward. High-end stuff with a long-range lens. Next to it was a stack of what looked to be photographs. "Evening, friend." A voice came from the trees to my right. I spun, nearly dropping the light. There was a tall, skinny man standing there, in flannel and jeans, hands in his pockets, just looking at me. Something about his posture was off, too stiff, like he was trying really hard to look casual, but failing. "Having some car trouble?" I asked, though we both knew that probably wasn't the case. He smiled. And geez, it was like watching a snake trying to mimic human faces. "Not exactly. Just taking a break. Admiring the scenery." "At night?" My hand was already on my sidearm. "Night's the best time to hunt." He took a step forward, still smiling that wrong smile. "You'd know all about that, wouldn't you? Been watching you work. You're good at tracking, but you miss things. Like those deer carcasses today. You checked the wrong spots." I felt a chill then. I'd investigated those kills earlier, but nobody knew about that yet. I hadn't even filed the report. "Saw you taking pictures this morning," he continued. "But you didn't look inside them, did you? Didn't check what was missing, what was replaced." That was like a punch in my gut. Because he was right. I hadn't cut the carcasses open, just documented the external damage and took samples. "How about you step into the light where I can see you better?" I drew my weapon, keeping it low but ready. He tilted his head, more bird-like now. "You're different from the others. More aware. Most people just drive right past, never notice anything wrong. But you notice things. That's why I picked this spot. Knew you'd stop." "Others?" I almost choked on the word. "Messes need cleaning up. That's what the truck is for. Makes disposal easier when you remove the seats. Though sometimes..." He paused, that awful smile widening. "Sometimes they fit just fine in the bed." I'd like to say I kept my cool, maintained procedure like we're trained to do. But my mind said screw that. I fired a shot into the air and yelled at him to get on the ground. He just laughed, a high wheezing sound, and stepped backward into the brush. Backup soon arrived. We found more than just blood in that truck. There were dozens of photos scattered on the floor, surveillance shots of the management area. Not just wildlife. He had pictures of wardens, rangers, hikers, some dating back months. The lab results came back a week later on the deer. The missing organs had been replaced with human tissue, and I had no idea what it meant. We never did figure out where the human tissue came from. Was it his own? The working theory was that he dug it up off of corpses. There were no active murders or recent missing person cases. We didn't find the guy. Last I heard, he's still at large. But what really messes me up was that one of the photos I found in that truck was of me at my cabin. The Crawling Man, from Adjessent. In 2016, I was delivering pizzas for Domino's. I was working late one night when an order came in for 2 large pepperonis and breadsticks. The address was on one of those roads that was semi-rural. I delivered out there before, if I recalled correctly, but never to that particular house. No biggie, it was about 14 minutes from the store altogether, so not too far. When I got there, it was sitting at the end of this long gravel driveway. The house looked kind of old, but was well maintained. The porch light was on and there was a car in the driveway, so nothing appeared out of place. I got out, grabbing the hot bag, and walked up to the door. I knocked a few times. There was no answer. I could see lights on inside, but I didn't hear any movement. I called the number on the order twice, straight to voicemail. The store policy was to wait 5 minutes and try calling again before leaving. After a while of knocking and calling, I decided to head back to my car. But when I turned around, I saw him there. A man sitting in my back seat, just smiling. He was wearing what looked like church clothes. Black suit, white shirt, tie. He was a really thin guy too. If I had to guess, he was probably 40-something. There was something off about his smile. It was just too wide and still. He wasn't even blinking. I was angry right off the bat. You don't just get in another man's car. I yelled at him, "Hey, get out of there!" But he didn't move, didn't even twitch. He just kept staring and smiling that freaking smile. I wanted to use the key to unlock the door, but I wasn't sure what this man would do. So first, I called the cops. I told them about the situation and said they'd send someone out. And I swear, while I was on the phone, I turned away for a moment, and when I looked back, the door was open and the man was gone. I was like, what in the world? I looked around, seeing where he went. That's when the crazy crap really kicked into high gear. I felt a sharp pain on my left thigh. I shouted and jumped back, nearly falling over. There was the man on all fours on the ground like some animal. He had bitten my leg through my jeans. He was still wearing that suit, still had that weird smile, and was staring at me. He didn't make a sound, no growling or breathing, nothing. Just smiling. Guess he really enjoyed the taste of my pants. I pulled myself away from him and scrambled into my car. I started it immediately, then remembered the open back door. I reached behind me and pulled it shut. I swear I felt something in my ribs pull when I did that. I put it into reverse and I was about to pull away when a thought hit me. I had just called the police on this guy. If I leave the scene, would I get in trouble? I couldn't afford a ticket or a fine or anything. And getting in trouble with the law while on the job could cost me my job. So I cursed in my head a number of times, wishing I hadn't called the cops now, because I'd convinced myself that I was stuck there. I locked the doors and just waited. Engine running, everything locked down. The man stayed out there on all fours, looking at me through the driver's window. He didn't move at all for what felt like ages. The whole time, nothing about him changed. I kept checking my phone, watching the time, wondering when someone would show up, or if I should call the cops again. But I was scared to look away from him for too long. I looked up and he was starting to crawl again. Not walking or anything like that. Nope, he was crawling like some sort of feral man, heading around the side of the house. He moved weird, kind of jerky but fast. I swear he must have done this before. Looked like he practiced. Once he went around the corner, I never saw the man again. The police showed up about 2 minutes after that. They searched the property but didn't find a soul. In fact, the house was empty. Apparently, the guy owned the house. And I'm certain he was the one that ordered the pizza. The next morning, I went to urgent care to get my leg checked out. The bite didn't break the skin, thankfully. Just left a bruise that was gone in a few days. Doctor said without broken skin, there wasn't much risk of an infection. But I was given some antibiotic cream just in case, and told to follow up if anything got weird. The cops never did find the guy, as far as I know. They took my statement, talked to neighbors, but nothing came of it. One of the officers even asked if I'd been drinking or using anything before they realized that the guy owned the place. I hadn't. I don't do that stuff, especially not at work. I kept delivering pizzas for a while, and then I moved to a different job, working at a warehouse. The bruise healed up fine and nothing else strange ever happened. But I'll never forget that man. When a strange guy comes crawling at you and bites you on the leg, dressed his Sunday best, that's not something you're gonna forget. Still though, I wonder what he was smiling about. Stalked, from Jason TD. One of the best gigs I ever worked was night security at a certain business park for about 3 years, but it did lead me to my most creepy encounter. Now, the place is a pretty standard setup, with 4 office buildings arranged around a central parking area. Most of my job entailed just driving between the buildings every hour, checking doors and looking for anything suspicious. The buildings are far enough apart that we use cars for rounds instead of walking. Company provides these white Ford Explorers with the security logo on the side. My shift was 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and I usually did my rounds at 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, and 4. This happened during a 2 a.m. round. It was a clear night, very cold but not freezing. The lot was about half full because some of these companies run late shifts. I just finished checking Building C and was driving toward Building D when I saw something move between 2 cars in my peripheral vision. My default assumption is it was one of the employees, but when I turned to look directly at where I'd seen the movement, something was wrong. Whatever I'd seen was tall, really tall. I pulled up alongside that row of cars, shining my spotlight down the line. Nothing there. Maybe I was getting tired. 2 a.m. is always the hardest part of the shift. As I started to drive again, I caught another glimpse of movement in my rearview mirror. This time I saw it more clearly. It looked like a stick figure drawing that had come to life. I know how crazy that sounds, but that's exactly what it looked like. Just a black outline against the parking lot lights. Impossibly thin, arms and legs that seemed too long. It was moving between the cars with a weird but fluid grace. I stopped the car, turning around in my seat for a better look. Nothing there, but now I had this feeling of being watched. You know that sensation when you just know something's looking at you? It was like that, but worse. I decided to finish up the round. As I drove toward Building D, I kept checking my mirrors. That's when I saw it again, but closer this time. It was following my car, using the parked vehicles as cover, apparently. It had to be about 8 feet tall, but it moved like it weighed nothing at all. And that, the way it moved, was what really got me. It wasn't walking exactly. To me, it looked more like it was gliding, with these jerky movements that reminded me of those old stick figure animations. Its arms swung wrong, like they had too many joints or maybe no joints at all. I picked up the speed a little, trying to act normal. In my head, I was just telling myself I was very tired. Maybe I needed to cut back on energy drinks during the shift. But then it stepped out into the open, right in the beam of my headlights. I hit the brake hard. The thing was about 30 feet ahead of me, just standing there. It looked exactly like a stick figure. No features or clothes, not even texture. A pure black outline in the shape of a person, but wrong. Its arms hung down past its knees, and its head was a perfect circle on top of a too long neck. For maybe a few seconds, we stayed like that. Me terrified in my car, this thing standing there, not moving. I don't even think it cast a shadow. It then took a step towards my car, so I threw it in reverse in response. When I looked forward again, the thing was gone. I spun in my seat, checking every direction, but there was nothing. The parking lot was empty and normal, thank God. I sat there for a moment, trying to calm myself down. But then there was movement. I turned just in time to see it duck behind a van, head too high. I could still see that perfect circle above the van's roof, tilted, like it was looking at me. I decided to skip the rest of my round at Building D. Didn't tell anybody. Didn't want to admit I was scared of what looked like a living doodle. As I drove back, I kept seeing the thing. Every few cars, that black stick shape would be there, always on the edge of my vision, always moving in a weird and fluid way. Sometimes it would be crouching between cars, its two long limbs folded like a spider. Sometimes it would be standing at its full height, blank circle head tilted at weird angles. The worst part was the silence. Even when it got close to my car, I didn't hear sound. Just this absolute quiet that made everything feel like a nightmare. I was about halfway back to the main building when it stepped out in front of me again, towards my right. As I watched, it sort of unfolded itself. It had been crouched down to about the height of the cars, but it just kept getting taller and taller, stretching upward to about 10 feet high now. I hit the gas hard then, and I didn't slow down until I reached the main building. When I parked and looked around then, the lot was empty. I finished my shift inside, letting my supervisor know I wasn't feeling well. I spent the next 4 hours watching the lot through windows, but I didn't see it again. When my relief showed up at about 6 a.m., everything looked completely normal in the morning light. As I continued to work there, I didn't see the stick thing again. Maybe this is the strangest story you've ever heard, and as such is unbelievable. But I'm telling you it happened. Even so, maybe it really was just extreme exhaustion or something I ate. But who knows? Is there some sort of creature out there that looks like a giant stick figure? The Rocking Chair Attack, from Lease-uh. I'm a realtor, and this is the most disturbing thing that ever happened to me. I was showing this house. It was a late evening showing at a farmhouse. The showing itself went fine. Nice young couple, probably wasn't going to make an offer, but that's not the important part. I was driving back sometime around 9 or 10 p.m. It was already dark, and these old country roads don't have much lighting. I saw it in my headlights before long. Someone left a rocking chair right in the middle of the road. Just a basic wooden one, I could see on any porch around here. I stopped about 20 feet from it and put on my hazards. There wasn't much traffic on this road, but I couldn't just leave it here for someone to hit. I exited my car, leaving it running. The door's locked when I shut mine. It's a newer model that does that. I walked toward the chair using my phone's flashlight. I suddenly heard the first twig snap in the woods to my right. I was caught off guard, so I just stood there for a moment. It sounded pretty close, maybe 10 to 20 yards. Then I heard another snap from the left. I turned that direction, but couldn't see anything through the thick underbrush. But then I heard more sounds, like multiple people moving through the woods. Whoever they were not trying to hide anymore. I could hear branches breaking, leaves crunching, getting closer from both sides of the road. I was surrounded. And then I saw them. They were people in dark clothes and ski masks, stepping out of the woods. They were holding things. One of them appeared to be holding an axe. More and more folks emerged, all in ski masks, all carrying various weapons. Before I turned to run, I saw about 7 people. I turned to run back to my car, but then saw 2 more people coming out of the woods near it. Too close. I was cut off. And when I tried my key fob, the locks wouldn't open. The car wouldn't even respond. Maybe I was too far away. Maybe the battery was dead. I don't know. They began to walk towards me. Not running, thankfully, just a steady but terrifying pace. I did the only thing I could think to do. I ran. I went down the road, away from my car, away from them. I heard them start to run too. The first house I saw, I ran up to the door and began to pound at it, yelling for someone to let me in. The lights were on, but no one answered. I could hear someone getting closer behind me. So I ran to the next house and tried again. Same thing though. Lights on, no response. I was starting to think I was being ignored. Now, I was in decent shape then, but I was wearing heels. I kicked them off somewhere between the second and third house. The pavement immediately hurt my feet, but I kept running. I could hear them behind me, not too close but not far enough. After the third house had no answer either, I realized this wasn't going to work. They were going to catch me if I kept trying doors. I looked around, spotting a drainage ditch off the side of the road, hidden by tall grass. Without really thinking about it, I dove in and stayed as silent as I could. The ditch was maybe 4 feet deep, lined with concrete. I pressed myself against the side, trying to control my breathing. I then began to hear them running and walking past on the road above. I heard someone say something, the first sound I'd heard any of them make, but it was too muffled and not close enough for me to understand. I stayed there for a while. I wasn't counting the minutes. My feet were bleeding a bit from running on the road, and they ached. Every sound made me hold my breath again. A car passing, an animal moving in the woods, wind in the trees too. Eventually, I gathered my courage to peek over the edge of the ditch. The road was empty. I could see my car's hazard lights blinking in the distance. I pulled out my phone, hands shaking, and I dialed 911. The police arrived in about 10 minutes. 2 cruisers with the lights on. They helped me out of the ditch and took my statement. One officer stayed with me while others went to check my car and the surrounding area. They didn't find anyone in the woods, and the rocking chair was gone. My car was still there, running, but now all the doors were unlocked. But I know they were locked when I got out. I specifically remember the sound they made. The police said maybe my key fob was delayed, or maybe I clicked it again and it happened to work but didn't notice. Maybe that detail of the story isn't important, but it's still quite odd. They escorted me home and took a full report. They checked with the people at the houses I'd run to. However, no one was home. What are the odds that none of the people in the 3 homes I tried were home. They never found the people who chased me, never found the chair either. But to be honest, they didn't have a lot to go on. I didn't get much detail from the people wearing masks, and everything was dark. I took a week off work after that, letting my feet heal up, trying to restore my trust and sanity, and I don't think I ever fully recovered. When something like this happens, you might wonder what that person, the victim, will end up fixating on. For me, it's driving at night. I can't do it anymore. I've got this deep, dark fear that I might be tricked or ambushed again in some way. I don't trust people. I don't trust lonely roads. And I don't trust the dark. Be careful out there. My Early Commute Encounter. From Regiss. My commute is very early, pre-sunrise, and it's often very, very dark, even under open skies and a full moon, thanks to hills and trees. The route I take cuts through some farmland and patches of woods, about 8 miles of winding back roads before hitting the highway. Most mornings I only see 1 or 2 other cars until I make it to the main roads. Back in March 2023, I had an experience that still makes me uneasy when I think about it. It was winter, so especially dark at that hour, and we'd had some fog rolling in from the river valley. The fog wasn't too bad near my house, just patches here and there. About 5 miles into the drive, I noticed headlights behind me. That's not unusual. As I said, sometimes I would see other cars on this road despite how early and dark it was. Possibly other early shift workers. The car stayed pretty far back, which I appreciated. Nothing's worse than someone riding your bumper on these dark back roads. Those new bright as heck LEDs shining at you from your rear view while you're still trying to wake up. As I approached one of these sharper curves, I noticed the headlights behind me had disappeared. I wondered if they turned off onto one of the side roads. Just past that curve, I saw someone standing on the shoulder of the road. My headlights caught their reflective vest, reminded me of the ones the road workers wear. Now, it seemed weird to have road work at this hour, but I slowed down anyway. There wasn't any equipment or signs that I could see. The person had their back to me, just standing there in the reflective vest. As I got closer, something seemed odd about their posture. They were standing completely still, not moving an inch, even as my car got closer. Most road workers would at least turn to look at an oncoming vehicle. When I was about 50 feet away, they suddenly turned their head. Just the head. A full 180 degrees to face me. The rest of their body staying perfectly still. I'm not exaggerating about the angle. Their face was pointing backward, their body facing completely away from me, and their face, well, it looked very wrong. Too wide or too stretched, it was hard to say, but definitely wrong. I hit the gas hard, startled. In my rearview mirror, I saw them step onto the road behind me, still with their body facing away but their head twisted all around. The fog had gotten thicker then, and I could barely see the yellow line. I took the next few curves faster than I should have. When I checked the mirror again, I saw headlights emerge from the fog. Same ones before, I was pretty sure. They were closer to me now, and the car was moving erratically, swerving between lanes. I couldn't make out what kind of vehicle it was too dark. I considered pulling over to let them pass safely, but something told me that slowing down or stopping would be a very bad idea. Instead, I pressed down harder on the accelerator. The road straightened out for about a mile here, and I could see the headlights gaining on me. My speedometer was pushing 70 in a 45. Then the headlights suddenly vanished again. Not like they turned off, but instead just disappeared. I kept my speed up, trying to watch both the road ahead and my mirrors. The fog was making it difficult to see anything clearly. About a quarter mile ahead, I saw another figure in a reflective vest. They were standing in the middle of my lane. Same position as last time, back turned towards me. I swerved into the opposite lane to avoid them. As I passed, I saw their head snap around to follow my car. But this time I caught a glimpse of a face in my headlights, a clearer look of a face. The mouth was open in an impossibly wide grin, and I swear they had too many teeth, eyes darker than the night. I blew through a stop sign doing about 65 and didn't slow down at all. My hands were trembling. In my mirror, the headlights appeared one more time, even closer. They were bright enough to light up my whole car's interior. I reached the stretch of road that runs along the river, where the fog was so thick I could barely see 20 feet ahead of me. Suddenly, something hit the back window, hard enough to make it crack. I heard an awful scraping sound like nails on metal. I can't remember exactly, but I think I screamed then. I tried to focus on keeping the car on the road while going dangerously fast for those conditions. The next few minutes were a blur of more fog and panic. When I finally made it to the highway, my hands were cramping up from gripping the steering wheel too tight. The headlights that were behind me were gone. After a couple of minutes of driving too fast, I pulled into a gas station and parked under the brightest lights they had. My back window had a spider web of cracks spreading from one corner. Looking closer, I saw something else. There were marks in the paint around the window. They looked like fingernail scratches. I sat there until my breathing slowed down, trying to make sense of all that happened. None of it seemed possible. Other customers came and went. Some of them gave me dirty looks, probably freaked out at the sight of my car and my expression. I must have stayed there for about 20 minutes. When I finally got to work, I was a few minutes early despite all that. I'd made that 15-mile stretch in record time after all. My coworker asked if I was okay. Apparently I looked pretty shaken up. I told her I'd had a close call with hitting a deer. Later that day, I looked up local news to see if there were any reports of strangeness or accidents, but nothing came up. I took a different route to work for the next week, even though it added half an hour to my commute, which was already long. I just couldn't face that road again in the dark. When I finally worked up the courage to take my usual route again, I left even earlier. I felt like I needed to prove that it was in my head. But I noticed something that morning that made my blood run cold. There were strips of reflective tape stuck to several trees along that stretch. They weren't full vests, just strips of tape at about chest height. I never noticed them before that night, and I'd driven that road hundreds of times. I checked those trees in the daylight after. The strips of tape were gone. I've never encountered any reflective vests or tape or people on that road again. Well, not ones with too wide grins and too many teeth. I can't really say what happened, but it was enough to make me want to work during the day and only when the sun was out. My driveway. From Hoobs. This all started back in December 2018 when I was 22. I was living with my parents outside the city limits, working at Popeyes to pay off some college debt. Our property was pretty isolated, set back from the main road with this long gravel driveway that wound through the woods for about half a mile. During the day it was peaceful, but at night that driveway turned into this dark tunnel through the trees. I was closing at Popeyes most nights, which meant driving home between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. We had this old lamppost near where a gate used to be at the entrance, but that was about it for lighting. The rest was just whatever my headlights could catch. That first night in December, I remember checking the time when I left work. It was 11:47 p.m. I was tired, smelling like chicken and grease, just wanting to get home and shower. When I turned onto our driveway, my headlights caught something that made my stomach drop. There was this pale figure, almost white, that moved behind a tree. It happened so fast I couldn't really process what I was seeing. At first I thought maybe it was a deer, but the movement wasn't right. I actually stopped my car right there and rolled down the window to listen. The silence was intense, no leaves rustling, no animals moving around, nothing. Just dead quiet. After about 30 seconds of sitting there like an idiot, I told myself it was probably just my tired brain playing tricks. Maybe it was just the moonlight hitting a tree trunk weird or something. I drove the rest of the way home and tried to forget about it. 2 nights later, I was closing again. It was about 11:45 p.m. when I got to our driveway. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't thinking about what I'd seen the other night. This time, I was actually looking for something. Sure enough, in almost the same spot, I saw it again. That same pale figure, slipping behind a different pine tree. The movement was quick, but deliberate, like it knew exactly where it was going. This time I couldn't just write it off. I got out of my car with my phone's flashlight. It was freezing cold, no wind at all. I could see my breath. I looked around the area where I'd seen the figure, but there wasn't much to find. No footprints, nothing disturbed in the brush. But something felt really wrong. It's hard to explain, but it felt like the whole forest was watching me. Like I was somewhere I shouldn't be. That feeling got under my skin and stayed there. About a week later is when things got really crazy. I was working a Saturday shift, and we were slammed. Didn't get out until 12:20 a.m. I was extra tired, but my mind was still racing from the rush at work. As I'm driving down our driveway, my headlights hit something that made my blood run cold. There was this figure crouched right in the middle of the path. It wasn't hiding this time. It was just there, out in the open. The thing looked human-shaped, but all wrong. Its limbs were too long. Its posture wasn't right. The skin was this sickly pale white color that seemed to reflect my headlights. When it turned to look at me, the movement was all jerky, like a broken puppet or something. Then it did something I'll never forget. In one smooth motion, it dropped onto all fours and just bounded into the woods. The way it moved wasn't natural. Nothing should be able to switch from standing to running on 4 legs that smoothly. It was fast, too. Way faster than a person could move through those woods at night. I sat there gripping my steering wheel for what felt like forever. My mind kept trying to make sense of what I'd just seen, but nothing added up. When I finally got the nerve to drive to the house, I checked every door and window about 5 times. The next morning, I told my dad everything. He could tell I was seriously freaked out, so we went out to look around. All we found were some deer tracks, nothing unusual. In the daylight, it was easy to doubt what I'd seen, but I couldn't shake the memory of how that thing moved. A few more days went by, and I had to close again on the weekend. Just after midnight, I'm driving home, and this thing steps right onto the driveway, maybe 200 yards from the entrance. This time it was standing up straight, and my God, it was tall. Way taller than any person I've ever seen. I got a better look at those proportions, and they were just wrong. The arms and legs were too long, like they had extra joints or something. Just like before, it dropped down and ran into the forest on all 4s, moving like some kind of animal, but not any animal I've ever seen. Over the next few weeks, I kept seeing it. Sometimes it would just stand at the edge of the woods, watching. Other times it would actually pace my car, running through the trees alongside me. I started hearing these weird sounds too, like something scraping against the tree bark. The worst night was in mid-January. I was driving home around 12:30 a.m. and this thing crossed right in front of my car. The way it moved was so strange, almost like it was underwater, but fast and precise. Then it started following my car through the woods. I could see it in my rearview mirror, weaving between the trees, keeping up with me even though I was doing at least 25 or 30. It stayed with me almost all the way to the house. I've never been so scared in my life. We searched the property so many times, but we never found anything solid. No footprints that couldn't be explained by deer or other animals. No marks on the trees that stood out. Nothing. It was like this thing only existed at night. The encounters started happening less often when spring came around, but I still caught glimpses sometimes, or heard movement in the woods that didn't sound right. The really strange thing is that we never saw it during the day. Not once. It was always between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. One thing that really stands out in my memory is how it moved. The transition from standing to running on all fours was so smooth, but so wrong. It's like it was designed to move both ways naturally, but nothing on earth moves like that. I worked at that Popeyes for another year after all this happened. I switched to day shifts as much as I could, but sometimes I still had to close. On those nights, driving down our driveway was pure torture. Even when I didn't see anything, I could feel it out there. Even now I catch myself scanning the tree line when I visit my parents. Sometimes at night, I'll hear sounds in the woods that remind me of those encounters. The rational part of my brain tries to explain it away. Maybe it was a person with some kind of condition, or maybe some kind of animal I'd never seen before. I'm the kind of guy who loves to drive, but there is something about driving after dark that keeps me anxious. It's harder to see, you're usually more tired, and I've seen one too many short horror films on YouTube to trust my rearview mirror. Trust me, don't go looking for those night drive short horror films, unless you want a passion to sell your car for something without a back seat. Good night. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Tales from the Break Room. Send us your scary work stories at eeriecast.com/submit. Help us grow by leaving Tales from the Break Room a review and follow on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And get bonus content by becoming a member at eeriecast.com/plus. Thank you. It's time for me to clock out. But don't worry, I'll be clocking in again real soon. Old Darkness Prevails is always hitting that grind.